Hey everybody, so I don't know if y'all have noticed, but it's getting pretty spooky this time of year. I saw a skeleton on someone's front lawn and almost puked up myself because it was so frightening. So I decided to just lean into it, face my fears, and watch one of the spookiest shows that's even around right now. The show Dream Motel. The Dream Motel is on the evangelical streaming service PureFlix, and it's kind of a Christian takeoff of The Twilight Zone. Jesse Chris is an angel who runs a motel. I assure you that he is, in fact, an angel, even though his name is Jesse Chris.
Jesse? Jesse Chris?
Every episode, a person who's having some problem ends up at the Dream Motel, and Jesse puts them in some kind of high-concept, fantastical situation that helps them through their problem. Dream Motel is, in every sense of the word, hog wild. The acting is horrible, the cinematography is bad, the sound is weirdly incompetent.
That's not important. What is important is that God has a plan for you.
God?
But beyond that, the stories this show tells, what it says, how it constructs its messages, is just off the wall, surreal, terrifying madness. And I'm so genuinely excited to talk about it with you today. So, okay, let's start off with a fascinating episode called Brother's Keeper. The episode is about a woman, Tony, who takes care of her younger brother, Freddie, who is mentally challenged and gives just the performance of a lifetime.
Thank you, Freddie, for everything.
She hates caring for him and feels stifled by his very existence, and when he accidentally breaks her mother's vase by playing some soccer in his room, enough is enough.
What have I told you about throwing the ball in the house? Freddie, that was Grandma's vase.
I'm sorry, Tony,
She starts going off about how she wishes he was never born. And so, in comes Jesse Chris to show her what her world would be like if that wish came true.
Haven't you sometimes wished that Freddie wasn't your brother? You know what? I'm going to grant you that wish. As soon as you step through those doors, Freddie will be no more.
So, considering how treacly and boring that synopsis is, I think we can all very easily imagine how we'd write the second half of this episode. Tony gets transported into this alternate world without her brother, and it seems great at first. She attains what she wants to creatively and professionally, live the life she dreamed of, etc., but it quickly sours. She lives a less compassionate, less fulfilling life, and more importantly, she misses her brother, her literal baby brother, who is now not real. This is basic storytelling, right? It's about want and need. Tony wants a life of freedom and success and comfort, but she needs love, she needs connection, she needs her brother. So, done. Tony figures all this out, goes back to the way her life was before, and we roll the credits. Job well done. But no. Dream Motel is, in fact, far too good for conventional storytelling and chooses to go instead in a bold new direction. When Tony wishes away her brother, she isn't sent to a life of luxury and success, but instead to a world where she is a failure in a lot of ways. She is now an alcoholic and got sent to prison for 4 years.
You went to prison, remember? For breaking and entering.
She never met her husband or had her children, and she never became a successful writer. Her life is way worse than it was before in every possible way. And essentially on that basis, Tony decides to go back to the way things were before with her brother.
I made a mistake. It's not too late to get my old life back, is it?
So this is honestly such a deeply unexpected and baffling choice, and that's for 2 reasons. First, it is disgusting. It is so gross. We have this disabled character, Freddie, and the question hanging in the balance is whether or not his life is a burden to his sister. Already, this is a suspicious premise, as nobody ever seems to ask the basic question. How about him? How about the guy whose life may soon be extinguished? He's a person too, right? It shouldn't all be about his sister's feelings. But here, with the end of the episode, they really lean into this angle. Freddie, a human being, is here conceptualized as a kind of virtue machine. Tony doesn't want him back because she loves him or because she'd rather him be in her life, but because caring for him shackled her to a life of domestic servitude, prevented her from partying, and enabled her to live her best life.
Because Because in this life, you don't have Freddie. And in this life, because you don't have Freddie, you chose to party. And party. And party.
He's a prop, and it's an ugly, ugly way to understand disabled people, or anyone for that matter. Second, the choice to place this brotherless Tony in such an unambiguously bad situation just doesn't make sense from a writing perspective. And that's because it makes her choice trivially easy. Which would you rather have? A shitty life that you hate, or a good life where you have to take care of your bro? That's not a real head scratcher there, right? And Tony choosing the former doesn't speak to any kind of meaningful change in her character. The show even tries to address this point in this scene toward the end, as Jesse asks her if she hasn't learned anything and just wants to go back because her old life was better.
Are you sure that maybe because of your current circumstances that your old life might be a little more rosy now?
No. This was all me.
But Tony's answer here comes off as entirely hollow, and of course it does. If someone is holding a gun to your head, threatening you with a terrible situation, they can't then turn around and ask, "Why do you want me to not pull the trigger? Have you become a better person, or are you just trying to get out of dying?" Jesse isn't offering her a good faith choice. He is forcing her hand and then acting like it's somehow insightful when her hand is forced. You know, this is an evangelical Christian show. It is on PureFlix, and God comes up all the time on it. And so it's hard not to read this as a metaphor for a very particular Christian cosmology. Freddie is a kind of Christ figure, right? This guy who you must accept into your heart, who you must devote your life to. Through him, Tony is granted a kind of heaven, a paradise where all of her dreams come true. And if she chooses to reject him, she will suffer miserably, go to a proverbial hell. It is a sobering thought then to realize that the logic of this episode is not merely a glitch, not a failure of storytelling. No, watching it, it feels like this is what the episode wanted to be about. That Tony is forced into taking care of her brother, that this is understood as sincere and beautiful, might seem strange or contradictory, but it is an extension of a very real and deep ideological position. Kind of interesting, I think. Okay, let's move on to another episode called The Queen of Scream. Shelley is a best-selling horror novelist who hates her work. She panders to the desires of her audience, selling gore and violence and sexuality in lieu of following her literary dreams.
If you want to make it, and if you want to pay your bills, then you are going to have to give up and write what sells. If violence sells, write that. If murder sells, write that. If sex sells,
let me guess, write that?
Luckily, Jessie Chris comes in and gives her an opportunity to talk to her past self and get her on the right track writing what she's passionate about, historical romance fiction.
But what do you really want to do?
Romantic historical fiction.
So this is probably the most fun episode of the whole bunch, and the weirdest thing about it is that it doesn't, add up at all. See, if I was a horror novelist who never wrote what I love to write, I wouldn't necessarily see this as some deep failure of my past. I got to be a writer. People loved my work. If I want to pursue a different genre now, well, I have a big enough audience and enough financial success to do just that. What's the great tragedy here, right? But throughout the episode, Shelley's life is depicted as one that's deeply problemed, and that's for no apparent reason. When she was young and started writing horror, her father essentially went no contact with her because he was so hurt that she wasted her gift.
How come you and your dad don't talk?
He thought I was wasting my gift. He said that I should use it to bring hope to the hopeless.
An obviously horrible thing to do, which she seems to understand as entirely reasonable. And now that Shelley has the opportunity to talk to her young self, she tries to get her to change her career with an inexplicable passion. At one point, young Shelley asks, "Why does everybody have to have an opinion on this? People do jobs for the money all the time."
Honey, I can't stand horror.
Then why?
It's a job. No one would fuss if I worked as a cashier. Why does everyone have something to say about this?
And as we might expect, old Shelley has absolutely no response to this. Why does it matter so much to you, Queen? Your job is cool, right? Why do you hate yourself? And why does everybody hate you? Well, I have one suspicion as to the answer here, that the actual meaning of this episode is simple. Writing horror is evil. This message is pretty obvious from a line I played earlier.
If violence sells, write that. If murder sells, write that. If sex sells...
Let me guess, write that?
That she writes about murder and gore and most importantly sex is framed as obviously bad. That's why it's a huge mistake that she wrote Pulp Fiction, why it makes sense that her father disowned her, because she was committing a sin. And after she fixes her life, Shelley serves God, seemingly writes uplifting Christian novels. So I have to wonder, looking at this, why is it like that? Why does the episode only talk about passion for your work and never about virtue when virtue is so clearly on its mind and absolutely necessary to make sense of the events in the story? Well, I of course don't know the answer to that, and it haunts me, frankly, that I never will. But in the absence of that claim, in the absence of saying that horror is a bad thing to write, the episode feels so odd. It comes together to say that any kind of choice a person makes in life that may not be entirely optimal is some kind of horrendous tragedy. By the end of the episode, Shelley, of course, manages to convince her younger self to not write horror, and she leaves the Dream Hotel a different person than the one who arrived.
You did make the right decision. Took you a little longer to get published, but right after that, you moved back home, and you set the course of your life. Do you remember?
Wait a minute. I remember everything else, too. How do I know which one is real?
After a while, that life will just fade from your memory and basically seem like a dream.
The last 30 years of her life, Jessie assures her, will just drift away, all because she wrote some books that were popular and that she didn't love. How awful is that? Also, as an aside, the Queen of Scream happens to have the best moment in all of the Dream Motel. After the plan works out and Shelley made all the right choices in her past, it turns out that these decisions resulted in her getting married. Out comes William, just this fucking guy we've never seen before.
Oh, there you are. I've been looking all over for you.
William, my husband.
Of course I'm your husband. Been at the bar this early, have we?
Hey babe, it's me, William, your husband. You may not know me too well, but I know your body intimately. Let's go back to the room and make love. Don't you know me, babe? I've been in your life the last 30 years.
Of course I'm your husband.
Hey babe, it's me, your husband, William. What incredible nightmare fuel. William, just this fucking guy. Anyway, let's move on to another episode called Meeting Madison. And this one is incredible, honestly. The episode surrounds a girl, Jennifer, who is considering getting an abortion. But then she goes to the Dream Motel to stay a night, and Jessie Chris lets her talk to the adult daughter she was thinking of aborting.
I don't know if I have time to even explain, but I'm a friend of your mother's.
My mother. You knew my mother.
So far, this isn't that odd, right? Really the most boilerplate, pro-life, Twilight Zone-esque episode I could imagine. But that is before the twist, which is as follows: she dies.
She was an amazing woman. Had her whole life ahead of her. She got accepted into Harvard Law right out of high school. And then she found out she was pregnant. She was only 19 years old. And then a few years later, she got cancer.
So on the face of it, this is the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. Imagine fucking a guy, getting pregnant, and considering getting an abortion before an angel comes to show you your kid. But he adds, by the way, you won't get a 30th birthday. Internalize that. Chew on that one. Jennifer, you were getting into Harvard Law out of high school, but it looks like life had other plans for you, Queen. Better hop on the hop on this baby bandwagon. I don't know what to tell you. Looks like you're not going to last all that much longer. And she barely reacts too. It's incredible. She just stares with this almost vacant expression on her face while she's told in no uncertain terms that she has a daughter and she's dead. But more than it just being an incredible twist, I'm interested in what this choice does, what it's trying to say exactly. And in the end, I think it amounts to a very novel pro-life message, one that I have absolutely not heard before. See, when I think about Christian conservatives and the cases they make concerning abortion, they often surround a discussion of rights. A person is produced at the moment of conception, and therefore abortion is murder. But here, we find something different, a kind of pragmatic case about consequences. At another point in the episode, Jesse talks to Jennifer about other people who came to the Dream Motel, and he says this.
He's a student in New York with a PhD. And in a life that was supposed to be full of happiness and wonder, his wife got killed in a drive-by shooting. Billy has spent the last 2 years tracking down that shooter, but not to bring him to justice or to put him behind bars, but to kill him. I brought him here so he could maybe find some evidences and whatnot, and so he can take it back and give it to the local authorities so that that guy can be brought to real justice. And after serving 15 years for his crime, the shooter, who's only 18 back in 1987, he will be released from prison. He'll get a job and he'll start a family. His son's a good man, nothing like his father. And he'll be given a chance at life because his father wasn't shot down in an act of cold-blooded violence.
Here, we can see a kind of moral premium placed on having children, right? It's not merely good that this guy didn't kill his wife's murderer. It is to some extent good specifically because that murderer was then able to have a normal kid. Looking at Jen's plot with this in mind, we can see how her untimely death might play into what this episode is saying. Put simply, because Jennifer is dying so soon, this is her critical opportunity to produce something that outlasts her, something to give her life the meaning that it might otherwise lack. So, having this baby comes to be understood as a rational choice in a pretty concrete, goal-oriented way. And to be honest, I just don't really know what to do with that. Like, do I find this episode convincing or emotionally resonant? Well, no. If I found out I was gonna die in 10 years, I wouldn't on any level think, well, time to get busy having sex so that my progeny may outlive me and affirm the goodness of my existence. I would think that was a pretty irrational impulse. People can have meaning in their lives in all sorts of ways, you know? I don't need a child simply because I'll be dead soon. But at the same time, I have to appreciate this episode if only for its novelty. In a crowded room of pro-life people saying abortion is murder, Dream Motel bravely goes against the grain and says, wait, maybe you shouldn't get an abortion because you might be dead in 10 years. And I think that's beautiful in its own way. So let's move on and talk about the episode The Voice. It's about a detective who I don't want to look up the name of and who we will simply call Big Booty Man. Let's call him Joey Meatballs, who went crazy because he couldn't track down a serial killer.
One thing he could never figure out was the who.
After he played Russian roulette with one suspect and brutalized a drug dealer, he was sent to a mental health facility.
Johnny was found in a drunken stupor in a bar with his weapon drawn, playing a game of Russian roulette with a suspected drug dealer. And all this was just 1 week after he almost beat another suspect to death.
But now he hears the word of God, and with his help, he escapes and goes to the Dream Motel to finally find the criminal and restore his name. So there are really only two things to say about this episode. First, it is just so bad. Like one of the most boring episodes of television I have ever seen, competing potentially only with the pilot of Dream Motel, which I'll talk about in a bit. There's a scene at the start where Joey's partner talks to the warden of the mental health facility, and I swear they cut back to it like 4 times. For around a full minute, we have to hear about all the security details of the building and how it's so impossible to break out. I'm gonna play all of it, I think, just so you have some idea of the degradation of this show.
Before I came inside, I had a really good look around outside. Things look good. Security seems tight. So, how did Johnny escape from here?
Honestly, we've never had anyone escape from here before.
Nurse Pratchett told me the exact same thing.
Fernwood is one of the most secure mental health treatment facilities in the country. Our security is top of the line. We have security officers who patrol the entire facility at all times of the day. Our camera points are dotted all over the facility, both inside and out, all motion detected and are monitored 24/7, and the whole facility is double fenced and patrolled.
Please, I don't care. I get that Detective Meatballs needed God to get out, but this information could be communicated to me just so much faster. Also, the episode has no payoff. That serial killer the protagonist went crazy to find, he's apprehended off screen. Joey's partner just says that it happened.
I just told you that Weston got away.
No, he didn't. We got him.
Like, I get that the show is low budget. I'm not trying to shame it too much for that, but this is like down bad low. This is a bummer, honestly. Second, the ultimate message of the episode is extremely funny to me. Toward the end of the episode, Joey asks Jesse why God took so long to help him, and they have this interaction.
Why didn't you talk to me at the beginning of all this? There are 4 young women that died.
John, I've been trying to reach you for a long time. But then, you got to relying on yourself. You started listening to your own wisdom. It took you hitting rock bottom before you ever got a deeper understanding and basically started listening again.
You were trying to do your job before. That's bad. God can't help you under those conditions, and he tried. No, idiot. For Jesus to help you out, you need to brutalize 2 criminals and go to a mental health institution. Then, and only then, can God potentially come to your aid.
And all this was just 1 week after he almost beat another suspect to death.
But, I guess that's just Christianity. God can only speak to those who beat the shit out of criminals when they fail to do their jobs. That's what priests are talking about in church. That's what they always say. Iconic episode, honestly. I take it back. This one is good. Okay, let's move on and talk about an episode called Song of Solomon. It's about a girl, Cassie, who's an incredible singer but refuses to embrace her talent.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have.
See, when Cassie was a kid, her brother, also a singer, died tragically, and as a result, her father turned away from God.
You're right. God isn't to blame, because there is no God.
Jason, you don't mean that.
Oh, but I do.
And started emotionally abusing her, smashing her guitar, repeatedly telling her she has no talent and could not sing.
Mom, he smashed my guitar. It's not the first time he's told me I'm terrible at music.
The episode resolves when Cassie is given a vision of her father weeping to her mother about how he regrets his actions and just hopes that she'll sing again.
If you cannot fix our relationship, if that is just too broken, well then I pray that you will at least heal her enough that she will once again sing for you.
And so she does. She sings the song, and it is truly like 4 minutes long.
Everybody's got a song to sing about a small town back road, Sunset Radio.
Then she goes home and rekindles her relationship with her dad. So this episode seems to be about some heavy stuff, right? Tragedy and abuse and the trauma that lingers into adulthood. And on some level, I don't want to judge it. There is a place, I think, for stories, even fanciful or strange stories about redemption and reconciliation. That said, I think it's pretty interesting how this father is presented. Cassie spent years with this man, being belittled and hurt by him. Yet his relationship with the family is never challenged. Even as Cassie's mother disagrees with her husband, she nonetheless stands by him, doesn't fight him, doesn't try to protect her daughter, stays with him for years, and seems to be fundamentally on his side.
Don't give up on your singing. Your father's not a well man. He doesn't mean anything.
What's more, it's odd that this is his story in the first place, that the father is so centered here. Hearing about Cassie's situation, my first reaction would be to tell her, wow, I'm sorry that happened. I hope that you can move past your father's abuse somehow and appreciate that the way he belittled you is not reflective of who you are or what talent you have. But that is not what we get. No, even in this horrible situation, the father is essentially given free rein to determine his daughter's path. Cassie's vision of him gives her the permission she needs to play music. Interesting. You know, we've already seen an episode of this show that's a bit like this one, right? The Queen of Scream, the one about the horror novelist. In that episode, the father is similarly given a strange authority over his child. He disowns her for writing pulpy horror, for not using her God-given talent properly.
How come you and your dad don't talk?
He thought I was wasting my gift.
And this action is framed as absolutely the right decision. Given this, I think we can start to make some sense of what's going on in Song for Solomon. See, the episode's not really about abuse, is it? The harm parental figures can inflict on their children. No, it can more accurately be described as an episode about power returning to its rightful station and producing the best outcomes possible. Cassie was not singing, just as Shelley was not writing the proper material. Yes, in this case, that situation was produced by her father, but this in no way invalidates his claim to being the despotic ruler of his family. He gets to turn the music off, make a bad choice, and he gets to turn it back on again, make the right one. As such, the protagonist ends up feeling like a prop in her own story, led to necessary outcomes by the two patriarchs in her life. Her father, who permits her to sing, and her God, who can use her voice. So that's all I have for that episode. Let's move on to another, called Charlie's Choice. The protagonist, Charlie, used to have a lot of potential. He was in medical school and he was a good student, but then he made some bad choices, began dealing drugs. And now, where the episode finds him, he has just participated in an armed break-in where his friend has shot and killed someone.
Police are still on the lookout for 2 suspects involved in a robbery murder that took place in the Lakeview Heights area last night.
But he's staying at the Dream Motel, and shocker, Jesse Chris gives him the opportunity to live this day again, right his wrongs, a kind of Groundhog Day thing. But, and this is a bit interesting, as Charlie once again wakes up on the day of his crime, he's not actually aware of what he did last time. His prior actions on this day appear to him as a kind of dream, and he's not sure if it has any connection to reality. And so, he does basically everything the same way, breaks into the house again even though he has some reservations about it. But when it comes time for violence to happen, he changes his mind suddenly. With his medical skills, he aids the woman his friend shot, and he gives up on the robbery.
I hope it was worth it. I think it will be. And you can forget about your share. I'm so sorry.
Get away from her!
Look, lady, I'm gonna stay and help your granddaughter.
This is all your fault!
So, if that all kinda sounds good to you, I agree. This story is, as far as I'm concerned, the best thing that Dream Motel has done. I'm not saying it's some kind of masterpiece, but I think there's a there. The idea of an incomplete Groundhog Day is inherently appealing to me, and the moment where Charlie decides to help the woman is honestly pretty effective. I don't know, I kind of like it.
Shoot, man, you must have had a rough night last night. Wish I could have been there with you. Saturday, dummy.
That is, until the ending. See, Dream Motel is never what it appears to be. It is an enigmatic and strange show that constantly throws curveballs at us. And in the final moments of this episode, after Charlie makes the right choice, Jesse sends him way farther back in his past.
Second chance.
Yes, a second chance at living.
Now, he gets the opportunity to make all the right choices from the very start. Be a good boy, go to medical school, have his mom approve of him.
I am so proud of you.
Now, I don't really know what to say about this besides, man, does that suck. Like, the episode already had an ending that worked fine. Maybe the people Charlie and his friend harmed forgive him after he makes an effort to help them. Maybe his aiding of the woman his friend shot makes him realize he'd rather heal than harm, and as such, she goes back to medical school. That ending would have been entirely competent, and it's so obvious, right? But no. That's not good enough, says the Dream Motel. A happy ending needs to be a perfect one. Charlie cannot merely do better now, he must have always done better. An ending that leaves him imperfect and doing his best would make him a flawed human, and they can't have that. You know, there's something I find super telling about this that I have trouble putting into words. Like, this episode initially seemed so Christian and in a really nice way. It was about how sinners can grow and do better things and be redeemed. It was about restorative justice and forgiveness. But because the episode was so afraid of its own stakes, even this message had to be scrubbed away and replaced with a big, meaningless reset button. It's just really odd and unsettling to watch. So, I've been keeping a secret from all of you up to this point, and it's because I wasn't sure if you'd be emotionally prepared to hear the truth. But here it is. Dream Motel is a serialized show. Like, it has an overarching plot for some reason, and the only way you'd know that is if you saw the pilot where we experience the arc and backstory of our hero, the angel, Jesse Chris. The story is pretty basic. Around 50 years ago, Jesse found himself at the Dream Motel where an other angel works, Mateo. But all was not well. A shifty demon man named Mr. Dark tried to have the motel destroyed.
It'd be best if you continued on your way before things heat up around here. If you catch my drift.
And our sexy little boys had to stop it. I refuse to tell you more about the plot of this episode. It is, as I alluded to before, legitimately one of the most boring episodes of television I have ever seen, and I lack the mental fortitude to rehash it for you now. So instead of diving deeper into the plot here, I just want to zoom in on one particularly baffling conversation that Jesse has with Mateo about whether or not they should fight against Mr. Dark. And this is how the conversation starts.
Well, I think we need to make a stand to make sure Dark doesn't get his way this time.
Jesse, we both know that God's will always be accomplished, no matter what.
We still can't stand by and let Dark just rip this place to the ground.
If it's God's will for us to take a stand, we will. But we have to remember, no matter what, whatever happens, good or bad, we have to trust that it's God's plan.
Okay. Right out the gate, this is really strange, right? And I think it speaks to a kind of inherent puzzle within the show's theology. See, we want to be able to use God as a moral tool, his word as gospel for what we should and should not do. And yet here, we seem to find a rejection of that concept. Jesse asks Mateo if they should do something, and rather than actually answering the question, he just kind of waffles about how whatever they do, it will have been right. This presents us with a kind of moral skepticism, right? Mateo doesn't know if they should fight for the Dream Motel, and he doesn't have any real way of figuring it out. Far from using God to make moral judgments then, the show kind of embraces the credo often attributed to Satanism. Do as thou willst. Follow whatever impulse you think seems right. Because whether the two angels choose to fight for the motel or not fight for the motel, it will have been the correct course of action. So, what does the show do with this strange situation it's given itself? Where could it possibly go from here? Well, let me play you the end of this conversation.
You think God is finished with this place?
No. Not now. Not after everything I've heard and all the threats that have come against us.
Good. Because I'm going to let you in on a little secret. If dark does show up tonight, we're supposed to take a stand. Because I know God's not through with this place either.
That's right, they just kind of say, screw it. Jesse, I know what I said before about how we'll defend the hotel if we're supposed to, and how I don't know the answer, but as it turns out, based upon literally no additional information, I know that God actually wants us to defend the hotel because it's super cool. It's just such a ridiculous cop-out, and I think it speaks deeply to the way the show internalizes and revels in its own contradictions. Yes, we live in the best of all possible worlds, and no matter what you do, it was God's plan all along.
Whatever happens, good or bad, we have to trust that it's God's plan.
And yes, God is our moral guide, and our purpose is to try to divine what He wants.
Because I know God's not through with this place either.
These statements do not make sense together, and yet, here they are, presented to us back to back in this obviously strange way, and that's all right by them. I think this is a perfect place to end my video about the Dream Motel, because this kind of surreal moon logic is what typifies the entire show. We want our love for each other and for God to come from us organically, to be authentic. And yet we also want to threaten people who withhold that love with a horrible punishment. We want people to follow their passions in life, but also be needlessly beholden to authority figures who threaten and demean them. We want to be accepting of people's mistakes, allow them to attain redemption, and yet we are also deeply uncomfortable with human failure. We want God to tell us what to do, and yet whatever we do, it is what God wanted. In some sense, I think this show does what Twilight Zone never could. Because watching the Dream Motel, I don't feel like I'm just witnessing a show, I feel like I'm living in one. Like I'm part of some sick nightmare that I can't explain or come to terms with, and which couldn't possibly be real. And yet, the Dream Motel certainly does exist. It is real. I have watched it. That's it. That's the end of the video. Woo! Hey, thank you so much for watching my video. If you liked it, please consider going to my Nebula or Patreon and giving me money there. Every month I have a bonus video, which is pretty fun. This time I talk about a pop culture detective video that I disagree with. He has some takes about Groundhog Day that I take issue with. And get mad about. So that's a pretty fun time. Anyway, it's fun to give me money, I guess. I don't know. Besides that, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And now it's time for my Patreon question of the video. Dylan Schwartz asks, if you could slightly inconvenience one person and it lasts for the rest of their lives, who would it be and what would you do? So Dave Rubin's kind of been pissing me off a little bit lately. Well, he always is, but right now I'm like, oh, that Dave. And I think it would be pretty cool if he just had a case of head lice. If just in all of his interviews with everybody, he was always just scratching a little bit. Just always, his little scratches, I don't know, I think that'd be kind of cool if no matter when you saw him, no matter what he was doing, he was always scratching just a little bit. At any rate, thanks so much for your time. Hope you liked it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.